What are the main differences between the Z60 and Z70 Ultra phones from Nubia? Usually there aren't too many differences when comparing one year to the next, but just in my initial review or comparison of both phones, I'm seeing a few differences that are pretty important. Now let's compare the two phones and see what's different about them. For starters, the screen has a few upgrades of its own. One thing is that the screen was increased from a 6.8 to a 6.85 inch screen. That's not something that's going to be visually noticeable and it's not going to really affect much, but it is a little bit bigger. They also added a few more pixels, which is always welcomed in phones, especially some that are geared a little bit more towards gaming. So previously it was around the 400 pixels per inch mark, and now it's around 435 pixels per inch. And every little pixel is just going to make it a little bit clearer. Supposedly the magic number is 350 pixels per inch before the eye is able to tell that there's a difference. But with the additional pixels, things do look a little bit smoother, even if it's not like right in your face. You know, if you compare 350 to 450, you will see it's a little bit smoother and nicer. The refresh rate was also increased from 120 Hz to 144 Hz. 120 is more than plenty even for gaming, but why not go to 144? It just seems like a great upgrade, especially again on a phone that has a little bit of a lean towards gaming as well. And probably one of the more important ones for everyday use is that they increased the max brightness from 1500 nits to 2000 nits. I think that 2000 mark is kind of like the benchmark or the kind of like the threshold for being able to see clearly outside. So I'm glad that they actually reached it this year. So in terms of the screen, it seems like almost everything was different this year. So it's just a major upgrade, I think, in the screen department. Next, moving on to the physical attributes. The first thing that is probably the most important one for everyday use and even for long-term gaming is that the phone was made a little bit lighter. And that's always welcomed because, yeah, heavier phones feel a little bit more premium, but that's gonna quickly fade once you start getting tired of holding it. So having a lighter phone is gonna let you use the phone longer without feeling any sort of fatigue on your fingers, being like having that constant weight on them. Another thing that was also improved was the water resistance. So now it's IP68, and I'm seeing on the website /IP69. So IP69 is supposed to be able to handle some pressured water, which is great because that pretty much means that in almost any situation, your phone's gonna be protected from water. The next one is probably one of my favorite ones for this generation, the Z70 Ultra, because I like to use my phone for photography and videography. And it's that they added a dedicated camera button. And it's not like the iPhone's camera button, which is kind of hate it or love it, or I think most people actually just hate it. It's just not a very good camera button. The Z70 Ultra's button is actually a really good one and provides the functionality that I really want. It has a nice feel to it and it doesn't require a lot of pressure. So when you go to press it, it's not gonna move your shot at all because you don't need that much pressure, which is gonna make you flex your hand and move the shot. So it's very soft, plus you get the half press to focus, which I think is an awesome feature. It seems to always focus on the center. I haven't seen any settings to adjust that, but I'm fine with that because, you know, I'm used to doing that with older cameras that kind of had that setting anyway. So the way I would use it, I would point at the center, do the half press, and then align my shot how I want it. That's one way of using it. But either way, just the fact that it's there and that you can press it super easily is awesome. And even though it's a soft button and it doesn't require a lot of pressure to push, it's not gonna bring up the camera by mistake because you have to hold it for like 2 or 3 seconds before it brings up the camera. So that's a big plus because if they found a way around, you know, accidentally bringing up the camera all the time. And to me, a great decision by them was not to remove the slider that they used to have. Instead, they just moved the slider to the opposite side. And now it's kind of in the same location as the OnePlus 12 now. And you could again change the functionality of it. I like to use it for, you know, sound on and sound off. So I'm just glad that they added the camera button instead of replacing the slider with the camera button. So kudos to Nubia for that decision. And another good one for the gamers and heavy users out there is that the Z70 Ultra's battery was increased from 6,000 milliamp hours to 6,150. So that's gonna provide just a little bit more of a boost when you're either playing games or just having a long day where you have to use your phone a lot. And of course, the chipset is gonna be more efficient, so that's gonna help with battery life, but it's also gonna provide a lot more power, which is gonna help a lot with gaming. So, I mean, this phone is just showing to be a great gaming phone. Next, I wanna move on to the cameras, where there have been a lot of changes, and this is one where I don't think it was changed for the best, at least not all of it. So let's start off with the main sensor. They actually went a bit smaller than the last generation, which is a bit surprising because the trend is usually to go bigger. But going smaller, if it's just a little bit, might not be a bad decision if it's gonna come with other improvements. For example, the Z70 Ultra comes with a variable aperture, and that's gonna help with getting the shots right when you're out and about. So if you want to take a landscape photo, then having a smaller aperture will probably be better because it's gonna help to bring everything into focus, and it'll help fight the sun if you're on a bright day. On the opposite side, if you're taking a portrait photo, then you're gonna want a bigger aperture so you can have a blurrier background. So you can actually change it from having the f4 down to the f1.8. That's gonna help you get that blurry background. And I gotta say, even without the portrait mode, I'm seeing some pretty good background blur on this camera. The next sensor I want to talk about is the ultra wide, where they went a lot smaller, not just a little bit. They went from a 1/1.55 to a 1/2.88. So I mean, that's leagues smaller. I'm not sure why they did it, maybe for some extra space internally, but I mean, that's gonna just make the photos worse. But on top of that, they also made it a lot wider. Previously, it was 18mm, and now it's at 13mm equivalent. So that's gonna make it a lot wider, so you do get a wider field of view, which a lot of people might like. But the problem is that the main sensor is still at 35mm equivalent. So now you have to cover over 2 times before switching from the ultra wide to the main sensor. And when you mix that with a much smaller sensor, then the output on anything close to that 2x point for the ultra wide is gonna be terrible, or at least really bad. And now looking at the telephoto lens, I don't see that they changed anything on the sensor, but they did change the focal length. And that actually does affect the way it works. So previously it was around 85mm, and now it's around 70mm. And that's a pretty big gap. So that means you're just gonna have less range. And to me, the problem there is that you're taking the least advantage of the main sensor, which is your best sensor, because now it's switching over at exactly 2 instead of the 2.3 mark or something like that where it was before. And that you're just not taking advantage of the main sensor, which is your best sensor. So overall, the quality looks pretty similar. It looks actually a little bit better because the new chipset seems to be handling it a bit better as well. But now you can't reach as far. So, you know, I guess you give some take some on that one. I do think it's still far enough where it's a good reach, but the 85 to me made more sense than the 70. And the last thing is the software, where I noticed the least amount of differences. So out of the box, it did come with Android 15 on mine, and even with that, I don't see too much in terms of visual differences or anything. So not much there. But I did notice right away that it does have an AI translation, which is probably one of the better AI tools. And you know, it did ask me for that up front about activating it. So I know it has that. It has a couple of extra tools, but not much else besides that. Not exactly a bad thing because I think that the software was actually really good before, and it is really good now. It feels super snappy. Everything goes super fast. I mean, I think that might have something to do with the, you know, Snapdragon 8 Elite. But yeah, everything is super snappy, fast, smooth. I haven't come across any bugs yet, so it's been a really smooth experience so far. So overall, this is one of the better year-over-year upgrades that I've seen in at least in recent years. Pretty much every aspect of this phone was upgraded. The cameras were either kept the same or had additional features added to it, like the main sensor has the variable aperture. And it also probably has the only aspect that's negative from one year to the next, which is the ultra wide sensor. It being a lot smaller and covering a lot more distance is just gonna give you worse output than the previous generation did. But otherwise, I mean, everything about this phone is just quite a bit better. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Z70 Ultra, and if you think it's a good upgrade from the Z60 to the Z70. If you are interested in purchasing either one of these phones, I do have an affiliate link in the description for them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.